we have some miscommunications. For instance, the white respirator mask that I was wearing during the last meeting struck one person as being theater. It was really to prevent the spreading of a respiratory infection, a pretty bad one that I had. It put me in the emergency room. And I didn't want to risk anybody else's life. Citizens, myself included, come here to aid you with information. The biomass project's complex. All of us know that. For example, the best available control technology sounds like it means the most effective pollution reduction that's available. But it's really only that technology with the calculation of dollars per ton of pollution captured from the smokestack indicates it's cost acceptable. For many emissions, other devices and procedures offer greater maximal reduction in air pollution. The concern raised in the past over Twisted Oak's financial partner, Renova Capital Partners LLC, locating a former office in a residence in violation of Denver zoning law, isn't about the technicality of not acquiring a license, the permit part for the office, but it's about an apparent lack of due diligence, which might cause other, perhaps more critical matters to be overlooked. A more recent concern is the Twisted Oak, according to page 9 of their proposal, isn't the company which will own and operate the project here. Another LLC is. This can make for future problem resolutions and difficulties. Aspen, Colorado right now is having a problem with an LLC that foreclosed on a wholly owned subsidiary LLC and acquired the Jerome Hotel. The city claims there's $405,000 in real estate transfer taxes due to the city. And the LLC claims that that's not the case. It's on its way to court apparently. LLCs are set up for reasons that can include avoiding financial responsibilities that are rightfully accrued to the company's legal business aspects. There's a lot of positive energy among the citizens, and that can be of use to the council. There's a lot of verifiable, vetted research on biomass that's available from the citizens for free. Those of us who come to the meetings want only the best for Jasper. And we willingly give up our time and work, as you do, to try to help. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. Norma Crowley.
Good evening, I'm Norma Kryline, MD, 1366 Altmeyer Road, Jasper, Indiana. I've lived here since 1989, and I practice pediatrics with the Memorial Hospital and Healthcare Center. And I'm here to kind of explain a little more about why I've come to oppose this on several levels. I spent some time the other night at the Utility Service Board meeting specifically talking about ethical issues that I saw and how things were being disclosed and how concerning that was to me. I wasn't really planning on going over that again tonight, but you know, if you'll peruse the minutes, it basically relates to a public meeting and question and answer session in February where Dr. Voigt and Jay Cattisane really incorrectly and misleadingly, blatantly misleadingly answered a question about western corn rootworm. I'm not a farmer, but I can recognize a misleading answer by someone who purports to be from a university, and that type of answer coming from someone who is supposed to give a balanced, expert, answer just was completely reprehensible to me. It's not allowed to happen in the medical profession, and it really shouldn't happen in front of the public. And I would, again, strongly caution you against doing business with anyone who has that type of ethics. I'm not sure if any of you have perused the website, Healthy Du Bois County, but the tape of the question and the direct link to the article in question are there, and I suggest that you look at it. It is somewhat technical, but I don't think it takes much to see that only about 10 to 15%, and only the positive part, the theoretically positive part, was answered in the question. And the other thing that concerned me was that it was in the context of a meeting where rebuttal was not allowed. And so anyone else who didn't know what was going on at that meeting would have no way of knowing that that answer left out a lot of stuff. And that just shouldn't happen. To me, it's not an ethical way of doing business. The rootworm, from an ecological standpoint, over and over again, it is a basic principle of ecology and environment to spend more time keeping it out and more money keeping it out than what you spend trying to eradicate it. And specifically to quote, and we do fall under the category of a non-rootworm endemic area. It has not invaded this area yet, and so it should be our interest not simply to purchase products to keep it out, and there's no question that the transgenic corn does that, but our interest should be in keeping the bug out. And I want to refer, this is a reference, Western Corn Rootworm Management, Ecology and Management. It's copyright 2003, but what I'm quoting in here is not so much what the exact nature of where the rootworm is and what has been done, because since that time, the transgenic corn is far more available. But what I really want to quote is the science of invasive species and what we're supposed to do to keep them from coming in. Specifically, one cost of prevention, and the most obvious, is the expense of maintaining exclusion apparatus, such as salary and training of interception personnel, like extension people and that type of thing. The second cost is that affecting individuals who are not allowed to profit from bringing in alien species, which may or may not have been intended for release to the environment, and equally the public that might have benefited from a planned introduction disallowed by the prevention procedures. These costs are offset by the benefits that accrue to society when potential invasions are prevented. In many cases, the benefit from an introduced species lies with the importer, whereas controlled costs of invasive species are borne by the public, and in this case farmers, by buying the more expensive GMO hybrid. However, prioritizing support for a costly prevention system is often difficult because the impact of alien species and the potential cost of invasions cannot reliably be predicted because of the complexity and calculated against the actual cost of the apparatus. Just because you can't put a dollar amount on it, it's kind of one of those priceless things, keeping our ecological and farming ecosystem healthy. It's what it's talking about, and those principles are timeless. The fact that this book was written in 2003, that information has not changed. And then I wanted to go a little more into some of the health effects. This, ironically, to me, was more challenging than proving the blatant discrepancy that occurred at the February meeting, and that blatant issue on avoiding the rootworm. One of the limitations of trying to figure out what goes on in medicine is that is there's a limitation in studies. You know, you have, and I've spoke to the group many times about this in terms of quoting studies. You really have to be very careful about quoting studies and whether or not they are actually truly accurate, whether they're landmark, whether they will stand the test of time, and whether or not they apply to what you're talking about. And that, I guess, you know, my expertise in that is 21 years in medicine and recognizing whether or not something applies. Now, to back up whether that rootworm situation applies to us, I spoke to the one of the professors of entomology at Purdue University about two weeks ago. And when particularly asked the question, in spite of the fact that there is GMO hybrid grown here, do we or do we not, as an area, should we follow this guideline? And he said yes, because you cannot count and should not count on a GMO hybrid or buying something such as that to be your sole line of defense against the rootworm. And part of the opinion I expressed last on Monday, and what I've expressed all along, is based upon that consultation with the bug man. And as I mentioned 2 days ago, I don't think the bug people are talking to the grass people, and I definitely don't think the grass people are talking to the bug people. And that's going to lead to some discrepancies in what people say. And in that case, I would look at who's paying who. The gentleman I spoke to is in charge of the state, in addition to being a Purdue professor of entomology, is in charge of the state invasive pest program. So he's essentially in charge of protecting us, not selling us something. One of the discrepancies I kind of wanted to ask about, and I don't mind questions if anybody has questions, if you give me time to think about the answers. One of the discrepancies I found, noted several places, is the distance that the circumference that is allowed for transporting biomass, and in the proposal it was listed as being between 35 and 50 miles. In almost every instance that I found a reference, it specifically stated it need to be located as close to the fuel source as possible, ideally within 20 to 25 miles. And I was curious as to why that discrepancy was there, and how that was going to impact, especially with the price of diesel. It also potentially tremendously increases not only the amount of diesel you're going to have to buy to run those trucks, but also the amount of people exposed to that increased pollution of hauling it in, because that is one of the concerns of biomass, is that it is a very voluminous crop. You know, compared to trying to haul coal in, when you talk about the sheer volume of biomass, it's, as I understand it, at least double the volume of what has to be taken in and back. So, and I could not find anything, really, that recommended a 50-mile radius on the transport of biomass. And so to me, I could see potentially on, you know, yes, we need the land in that area to have enough land to grow this, but on the other hand, in terms of the long-term economic viability, you know, this is supposedly carbon neutral. It's not carbon neutral when you use that much diesel to haul it back and forth. 50 miles is a long way to be hauling this hay product. And it will also impact upon the people living on those roads, because that's basically doubling the amount of space between the edge of the fuel source and the plant that was routinely cited as the ideal amount of space. Why would that also make a difference? Well, as I said, one of the limits of trying to explain this from a medical standpoint is trying to put together the effect that this is going to have on the community in the area, specifically on the issue of ultrafine particulates, since most of that information is relatively new. In fact, one thing I did find was that almost, the statement was basically made that this is a completely new area, that essentially nothing that's more than 5 years of age is going to be accurate. And so trying to find something that somehow quantifies the effect that this is going to have was very difficult. But one of the things I did find was this article, and it was published in January of 2008, and where I found it was very interesting. It's kind of a review of articles, and one of the things it talks about is basically, it's everything they could find talking about it and how it relates to early atherosclerosis and systemic oxidative stress. What that means is early atherosclerosis is heart disease, and systemic oxidative stress is cellular damage. It lists several things. One of the most interesting ones that I found in here was an article relating the distance that one lives from a road with the risk of cardiovascular disease, where they actually were able to measure in something like 4,500 German people, based on the distance they lived from a road, what their risk of cardiovascular disease would be. And it went directly up. Depending upon how far they were from the road. It's part of the discussion I have about the diesel engines. If you've got that many trucks coming in from that far, that's potentially going to impact a lot of people. And those engines are not subject to the same emissions control that this power plant is. One comment that was mentioned to me several weeks ago was the frustration of the not in my backyard phenomenon. And I think, all of us face that. And yet, when you look at this, and you have that volume of trucks in your front yard, and potentially the power plant in your backyard, and they're talking about the direct relationship between this and early atherosclerosis, and I'm talking direct effect, where they were actually able to measure an increased risk. I think it gives the people in that neighborhood something to think about in terms of whether or not it's a good idea. In fact, that was probably one of the other things that was cited most frequently, in addition to whether or not it should be 20 or 25 miles versus the 35 to 50 miles that was in the proposal, is absolutely not having it in a residential neighborhood, simply because the sheer number of people that are potentially exposed to this. And they specifically in this talk about diesel emissions, not so much a power plant, but diesel emissions. And I understand why the proposal is to locate it in a residential neighborhood, but it isn't a good idea because of the sheer number of people that you're going to expose to those emissions, to the tune of hauling in 300 tons a day, 365 days a year. 24 hours a day. At least there are so many factories in that area already that I think adding that number, and that's so low to the ground, was the other thing that came to me as I'm thinking of this. It's not a smokestack. This is a large diesel load where that emission is going to be relatively low to the ground and not dispersed going to potentially other areas. Most of this stuff is very new. One of the other issues on studies is that trying to produce a causal relationship, especially in something like this, where if those nanoparticles basically, or those ultrafine particles, they are so fine, they not only deposit in the lungs, but they actually have a systemic effect, and that was demonstrated. In other words, they not only stay in the lungs, they get into the central circulation. And it's basically pollution that stays in your body. It doesn't really come out very easily, And it's like a foreign body. It's like a splinter. The body says, I don't like this. And that's what leads to the clogging and the coronary artery disease. And that's a pretty significant statement to have that be the conclusion of this study, because it's not just about the lungs. Trying to prove that asthma is increased. You know, most of the time, I can tell you as a physician, I see a lot of asthma in this town. It's an asthma belt in this area, but it's not always. How do you define the incidence of asthma in a community? I can tell you potentially I don't write it down very often, because once you write it down, that's a lifelong diagnosis. In children, it can be reactive airway disease, it can be bronchospasm, it can be a lot of different things. And how can you quantify necessarily how severe it is or how pervasive it is? Is it just by ER visits? Well, I can tell you I see a lot of kids in my office that are very severe. So, you know, that's why I think the gut instinct of a physician as to whether or not this is a good idea. You can cite asthma rates, but there's a lot more than that that really should be involved in trying to assess the impact of this on a community. And part of it was what I saw as a challenge when we don't even have the results, again, of the proposal. You know, it's very difficult to argue when the supposition is literally more or less that there aren't going to be any emissions from this plant, and that the EPA guidelines are going to assume that we are healthy. In fact, that was a direct quote of Jay Cattisane that I disagree with. There really isn't, I mean, the EPA guidelines at best are what they consider to assure the most normal health possible with some cushion for vulnerable individuals. And on ultra-particulate matter, this is all new stuff in terms of the effect. But some of the stuff that's coming out is really very concerning. Now, are there other sources of it? Sure there are. But when you concentrate it in a neighborhood, that is a particular concern. And again, I saw over and over again two direct conflicts here. Number one, that a residential neighborhood is the last place to put a biomass power plant, and the distance that this is being trucked in. And I question also how much at over $4 a gallon, that's going to affect the viability of this. You know, I was kind of thinking somewhat sarcastically the other night at the way the government is going. Is this even going to be built? Although it's on subsidies, not on budgeting. We had a very, very concerning discussion this morning regarding the availability of vaccines at the county health department. I don't know if you're aware of that, but there are going to be more limitations on the number of children that can get vaccines at the county health department, where, as I understand it, you know, they will only be able to service those with Medicaid, no insurance, Native Americans, and Eskimos. And most people in our area have insurance. On the other hand, it's very high deductible insurance. Well, as of the 1st of July, because of budget cuts, they're cutting back on the program that allows them to give vaccines to underinsured people. And it's something that's just been cooking in my mind the past few days. Is, you know, here we have something that's going to rely on money we're borrowing from China in a budget deficit to build something that doesn't sound like it's in the right place from someone who's just not telling the truth in a public forum. The United Kingdom, this is from last year, in a change in policy / budget crisis, decided to cut back on energy subsidies, and Drax bought 2 million tons of biomass, but they're considering selling it overseas because it no longer made economic sense to burn it in 6 boilers. Hundreds of farmers growing biomass crops may now struggle to sell their produce. You know, that's another huge hole that I see in this is everything, including direct quotes from industry representatives, says that they are directly dependent upon federal dollars to make this work. And if we don't have money for vaccines from the federal government or the state government, I just don't see this as a priority. And we were specifically talking this morning in terms of what type of priorities are we going to have in terms of what vaccines we're going to give in the current budget situation. And I wanted you to be aware of that as you ponder this, because the money that's out there is kind of limited. And the only person that I see is guaranteed to profit from this is Jay Cattasane as the broker. You know, we may or may not collect rent from him if he pulls out. We're currently investing in negotiations, and that's not cheap. I don't know that lawyers are a whole lot cheaper than what doctors are. And at one point, and the group will back me up on this, I said, I'm not sure we're going to be polluted because I'm not sure this plant's ever going to be built. I'm not sure why we're even in this to begin with, because there are so many holes in how this is going to come about. And then the ethics of basically borrowing from China to fund the, you know, to not have enough taxes because of the abatements and the subsidies to the energy industry, instead of having companies like Enron that had this whole kind of Ponzi scheme 7 years ago, they've kind of recycled it, no pun intended, as this renewable green energy. And it's, when you look at the amount of diesel and everything else that's in there, how you define renewable definitely leaves a little bit to be desired. In fact, I found this in, this is of course from a biomass company. This is regarding invasive plants and pests. Invasivity is a poorly defined science. In fact, it's not really a science at all. And I will tell you after this, I kind of have the same opinion of the biomass industry. No standards for the definition of invasive. It's site dependent, and almost any plant could be invasive. Well, it really is more standard than that, although what I've seen in the biomass industry is actually far more questionable. In fact, that's an example of it. That's the type of stuff they put out there to sell their product. In Massachusetts, not only, and I said this the other night, but I'll say it again, 70,000 physicians in the Massachusetts Medical Society, and they have more biomass plants there, oppose the adoption, oppose the subsidization of biomass power plants. And so do the citizens. That fight was not over. They actually were going to put a question on the statewide ballot, and they basically convinced the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs of the state of Massachusetts to put an end to subsidization, which is essentially potentially going to close the biomass plants that currently are in Massachusetts. And that's a grassroots citizen effort. More information on air pollution, ultrafine particles. This is October of 2010 to kind of explain. I did not get a chance, but as far as the background and the state of the art of this, phagocytosis is basically your white cell's ability to eat the junk that's in your system. The conclusions of the article are that these ultrafine particles cause inflammation, alter blood coagulation, and trigger an autonomic response. One of the problems with trying to study that is a very slow response. In fact, one of the things they figured out is your window of looking at heart attacks has to be like 5 to 7 days after a spike in air pollution. But they did see that when they took the window out, because you know, whether it takes someone 5 days or 7 days to have a heart attack from the air pollution, you know, how do you capture that? How do you but when they looked at trends and they took it out, they were able to see the spike in heart attacks to a spike in air pollution, but they had to take it out a little further than what they initially anticipated. This is the one study from Germany, daily mortality and fine and ultrafine particles. There's several things here. Mortality increased in association with the level of ambient air pollution after adjustment for season, influenza, day of the week, and weather. And here's that statement. We saw comparable associations of ultrafine and fine particles in a distributed lag model where the contribution of the previous 4 to 5 days was considered. It's not real easy to get your finger around this. That's why I wasn't exactly looking forward to trying to prove this, because it's kind of one of those, no pun intended, it's in the wind. You have to kind of look at what's happening and draw a conclusion for it. This I found very interesting. This was a biomass plant that failed to happen in Scotland, and one of the reasons it failed to happen, public consultation in the planning process was one of the main issues contested in this development. In in-depth discussions, local people highlighted that they were not consulted in advance. The sitting decision was top-down and imposed on them at social and environmental costs. They believed that biomass plants have negative environmental and social impacts, and really didn't see anything to prove otherwise because of how the whole process played out. This is also a new article that leads me to also wonder about the sustainability of the funding for biomass. And when I said the statement before about the bug people talking to the grass people, this is basically a suggestion that the commerce people talk to the energy people and the environmental people in one room and see what they have to say, because I hear where you're coming from. You're hearing one group say you got to have this sustainability stuff, and somebody else saying it ain't good for the environment, and it actually suggests that dialogue. But as far as the National Invasive Species Management, and there was also an executive order that, at least to me, is probably going to take precedence if it ever came to court over the law. Executive order, which was co-chaired by the Secretaries of Interior, Agriculture, and Commerce, to coordinate decision-making where invasive species are concerned. I think they need to get back together and discuss this. But judging from what the books say, I kind of could predict for you what their consensus is going to be. To minimize the risk of biofuel crop escape into surrounding environments and subsequently invasive, scientists and resource managers, and this is this group that wrote this article, University of California, Davis, Ravens Ridge Farm, National Invasive Species Council, Otto During, Purdue University, he is a bug man, Earl Chilton, Texas Parks and Wildlife, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, and UC Davis, Jacob Barney, UC Davis. They recommend the U.S. government promote, fund, and employ ecological studies and scientific models that characterize the invasion risk of every biofuel crop within each target cropping region and identify ecosystems most susceptible to invasion. If they do that in the next year, are we going to, where does that put us from a I would just kind of predict from looking at this that it's not a good idea to do this right now. I think that's actually about all I have. The way I still have serious concerns with why we are trying to have Jake Hadisane match us up with someone. I think we would do a better job of that ourselves, whether that's a natural gas plant or what have you. I think that needs to be a community dialogue, but at least from what I've seen from a medical standpoint, from an ethical standpoint, I just do not see that this is the right man or the right plant in the right place or the right crop for this area at this time. You know, where that needs to go, I don't know, but you know, the whole issue also of burning such a small amount of biomass to qualify for the subsidies and essentially burn 80 to 90% natural gas, to me is just a questionable use of resources when we're talking this morning about whether we give the meningitis vaccine or the tetanus vaccine or any vaccine, because a lot of people won't be able to afford them because of budget cuts. I'm not where you guys are in terms of government, but I'd be complaining to somebody about the mess they put you in terms of making these kind of decisions. But nonetheless, I just don't see this whole proposal to be a good idea on any level. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Chris Breedlove.
Christopher Breedlove, 421 West 8th Street. Thank you for allowing me this time to speak, and thank you in advance for your cordial reception. I very much appreciate it. Part of my vocational occupation, when I'm called to go to a church, I undergo an extensive, robust reference check and background check, a thorough vetting. It's very important to the congregation to know who they're calling. It's very important to know who you're bringing in as a congregation to shepherd your flock, to teach your children, to nurture your community. And so, as part of the denomination I'm a part of, they require extensive background checks. Believe it or not, I have to provide 10 written references, several phone call references, and it's every bit as hard as the theological training I've undergone to be vetted to go and serve in the church. And at the same time, it's the highest privilege I have in my life to serve the church and serve the community in regards to the faith that means so much to our congregations and community members. Having said that, I would hope as a citizen that we would have a thorough vetting and background check and references of one, Mr. J. Caddison. It took concerned citizens a bit of a time to get our mind around who J. Caddison was, making phone calls, doing background checks, referencing, research, and it's quite an undertaking to do that sort of thing. And I'm sure that our Utility Service Board has done their own vetting, and I'd be interested to see how it compares to the vetting that concerned citizens have done in recent weeks. Mr. Caddison has provided his online resume of sorts, and you can see the years and the places that he's been involved. And I've circled Morant because that was the last significant office that he held, the last significant employment that he held. Since his time at Morant, he's been largely a consultant for First Solar. And so we started to do our digging, we started to do our researching, we started to do our references, and we found, from the perspective of concerned citizens, we found some things that give us great concern. And so we want to share that with our city leaders. And that's another thing in this process. During moments of gracious exchange and after meetings, I very much appreciated your handshakes. I very much appreciate hand waves when we pass each other on the streets, because we are neighbors. After this is all said and done, we live together, we'll go watch the football games together, we'll see each other in the restaurants, and there should be great civility among neighbors. And that's what makes Jasper such a wonderful place to live, to have those relationships, to have that quality of life that you can't put a price tag on it, that many people move to Jasper for that kind of quality of life, the opportunity to know your elected officials by name, first name, and to be able to call up your district personnel and have a conversation with them. That's priceless. Let's just say him or her, depending on who's in the elected seat. So having said that, having qualified that, at times I've been concerned that our city leaders and our citizenry have been pitted against each other in the fray, and as Alec mentioned, that at some points there can be a lot of passion on both sides. And during this pitting of leaders and citizens, we are missing Jay Caddison to be here to answer questions. In fact, when I talk to other communities that have engaged in concerned citizens coalitions when biomass industries have moved in, they say, you know, what you're going through there in Jasper, Indiana is different than what we went through, because we had opportunities to vet, to question the proposed biomass companies coming in. We had opportunities for back and forth exchange in the right acceptable public forums. They say it's remarkable that you haven't had that in Jasper, Indiana. In recent days, concerned citizens have researched several and many disconcerting involvements and stories revolving around Morant during Caddison's brief employment there. You see on his profile there, that's posted online by him, that he spent about 2 years, 2000 to 2002. He doesn't specify the dates, the exact month dates that he started there, but roughly from 2000 to 2002, 2 years. And during that time, Morant was under a lot of scrutiny and a lot of litigation and a lot of unsavory involvements, especially from the concerned citizens' perspective. And it's also from our perspective, there has been failures by Caddison to better disclose or to aptly clarify his involvements and endeavors to the general public. Furthermore, Caddison or any Twisted Oak partnering affiliate has been available to the general public for a quote-unquote community and conversation. During Caddison's time as one of the vice presidents of Morant documents were subpoenaed. Along with Enron, Morant was held in contempt for not handing over subpoenaed documents. This was all during his 2 years with Morant as one of the VPs. Morant was eventually ordered by the Department of Justice to pay an $11 million penalty to resolve its criminal allegations. That took some time to pan out. It took some time for this to pan out, and by that time, Jay Caddison had moved on, but this all initiated during his time there. An article cites this. I'll just read it to you in brief. Arthur Anderson is once again the target of litigation, even though the former Big Five accounting firm exists for the most part in the name only. Creditors are blaming the one-time auditing giant for the financial woes that plunged Morant Corporation into bankruptcy. According to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the creditors allege in a recently filed lawsuit that Anderson failed to investigate problems at Morant and gave the Atlanta-based electric power company a clean bill of health despite numerous red flags that included its own internal reports, according to the newspaper. The Anderson reports were put together several months before Southern Company. Southern Company was the parent subsidiary to Morant. Jay Caddison spent time at Southern Company as well. Eventually, Morant sued Southern Company during the bankruptcy, and so Mr. Caddison has spent time with both of these companies. The utility's then parent spun off Morant in 2001. The reports asserted that Morant was overly concerned with meeting specific earning goals at a maximum risk for misstating its financial position, according to the newspaper's account for the lawsuit. In June, Morant and its creditors' committees filed a separate lawsuit against Southern, asserting that the holding company played a role in its bankruptcy. The Journal-Constitution said Morant officials referred comments on the latest lawsuit to creditors' attorneys who were unavailable for comment. I'm going to skip a couple of paragraphs, but I will make this available to the press for review, and then I'm also glad to make that available to you too upon request. The suit also alleges that Anderson's internal reports in late 2000 and early 2001, again, this is the time frame that Mr. Cattison was employed for Morant, said Morant was aggressive in its accounting, highly optimistic in its asset valuations, and demonstrated a consistent bias toward overstatement of income and accounting estimates, said the report. The newspaper also said the lawsuit claims the reports deemed Morant's management to be financially unskilled and unable to reliably measure the value of a specific business or any of its significant segments in a strategic context. Since the fallout, and these are my words, since the fallout of Morant's various litigations, bankruptcy proceedings, and subpoena troubles, Cattison, from the perspective of concerned citizens, appears to have laid low for the last 10 years as a consultant before re-emerging as a major biomass natural gas power plant broker in Jasper, Indiana. It appears to concerned citizens that this is Cattison's first significant re-emergence in the business project world since his time at Morant. We are negotiating with the person who will not be operating the power plant. We are negotiating with a broker that is here today and will be gone tomorrow, whatever decision we make. We are not negotiating with the one who would run the proposed operations at the power plant. The nature of ongoing negotiations is that as long as parties remain at the table, a pending agreement is close at hand. We might be learning a lot in the process, but at the same time, the confidence of citizens observing this take place is also at stake. Citizens think that Cattison and his partnering affiliates should be available for ample public conversation and full disclosure before any further negotiations move further ahead. Citizens also think that no amount of risk to our health, our well-being, our quality of life, and the sanctity of our life is worth the promised reward of non-disclosing and non-communicative parties. A Twisted Oak Partner affiliate on February 8, 2011 stated that there was an infinitesimal risk of the adverse impact on health by polluting emission released from the power plant smokestack. Adverse health effects will be of no infinitesimal consequence to the one adversely impacted. One last closing comment, and I have several articles of Morant during the same time frame that Mr. Cattison was employed by them. It's just, I haven't been able to count the many articles of the troubling nature from my perspective, from concerned citizens' perspective, that Morant was involved in. I thought about this today, that if we had a proposal on the table to build a biomass / whatever combination of combustion technology, power producing generation, if we had a proposal to build it from ground up using a fluidized bed burner, which is the superior technology to stoker boilers, I imagined, what would it be if they proposed to build this on the west side of Newton and Grasslands? Would we let it happen there? And I thought, what if we were building this ground up in the neighborhood residential area of east of Newton Street? Would we let it be built up from the ground up in those communities? And I had to think, knowing what we know about the doctors, local doctors that have come forward with their names and with their quotes, and many more waiting to do so if needed. And from the doctors that we've talked to, Dr. Sammons was the first doctor I talked to about this that brought me up to speed with what he knew, traveling from communities and being invested in this concern from a genuine place. Knowing what we know, I just can't imagine we would take the risk to our health, what Dr. Kryline talked about today. I can't imagine we would take the risk to our farmers, what has been reiterated in this last week. I can't imagine that we would take the risk to our financial well-being as citizens of this United States, as was mentioned by Dr. Kryline too. The ideal that a very small portion of the proposed fuel source for this power plant to generate electricity enables it for the renewable premiums. The ideal that as citizens of this country that we are subsidizing this kind of combustion technology that puts so many things at risk should give us pause. With a mounting national deficit, there's no escape from our responsibilities as citizens to speak up about those concerns. There's no escape from responsibility as citizens to speak up for the well-being of our neighbors. You know, this is what I'll close with. There are many other people that would really want to convey their thoughts, their convictions, their feelings, their opinions, their research to you. But this can be a very intimidating place to stand up, or just to stand up in front of people in general. It takes a little bit of familiarity to get to this place, to feel comfortable, to be able to speak to you and to speak in public. And not everybody has that desire, not everybody has that gift. But there are many, many, many people in our community that care deeply about Jasper, that care deeply about this issue. And they've been coming out in recent weeks, and we're very grateful for that. Had the chance to briefly speak with Kevin Manley after the March 24th meeting on the phone. We just had a brief, cordial conversation, and had a brief conversation with John Schrader, and I thank you for having those conversations. And I mentioned to those two gentlemen the possibility that our standards should be high above IDIM and EPA, and other communities have pursued ordinances of clean air. And so we've had some people work on an ordinance that could be tweaked by a common council, could be looked at, could be used as a template. But we've done a lot of work on that, and I've only made one copy, but I will make this available to the press to look at first, and then I'll also make it available to you to look at too. And again, it's something that you could tweak, you could start from and craft in a unique way to Jasper, Indiana. But these kind of measures would be a win-win move for both leaders and for citizens, and something for us to work on together. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate your hospitality this night. Thank you.
Yeah. It was brought up at the mayoral candidate forum that the Jasper Action Team presented their incentive plan here several months ago, and that they were waiting for a response from us, if I remember correctly the way it was stated. If I recall, I mean, we heard that presentation last year, but didn't we ask some questions and we're waiting for them to come back to us? Or
when they came to the council meeting?
Yeah.
Right. And, but I think what they're wanting to do is get everybody in the St. Louis County, the rest of the elected boards, Bergen, Heidelberg, and kind of talk through this whole thing and see if it's something that we can be compromised.
I think isn't that what Greg is saying?
That's what I was waiting to. We are going to pursue that through the Du Bois County Council, and which I think is a good way to do it. They are going to have a workshop on this, so I just wanted to relay that to anybody who's there. Pardon me?
You want to give the date?
It's Thursday, May 12th at 7 p.m. at Vincent University, same place the forum was. So it is moving forward, and it's good to see it in this way. But I was still thinking too that it all wasn't our court on this thing, was it? No.
There was some. That's when they decided to present it to the state,
Right.
to see if they could, because some of what they presented wasn't in line with what the state had already spoken on, and then part of what they presented from the research that we had done, we were being advised that it wouldn't necessarily be in compliance. There's the schedule weren't in compliance with the law that was already in place, and the edit portion wasn't something that the state law allows. So then they were taking it to the state, is where I thought we were waiting to see if they would get what they were proposing, those parts of it adopted by the state legislature, and then you guys could determine that, which parts of those did you want to lose.
And also the fact that they went presented countywide.
They did say that too at that time, that they should go to the entire county.
Well, I didn't, I guess maybe I misunderstood that the other evening, but, you know, the ball was in our court. But anyway, it is moving forward, which I'm glad to see.
Okay? Anything else, Ms. Thompson?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Have a motion to adjourn made by Councilmember Tom Schmidt, second by Councilmember Randy Book. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.